Olivia Bowles, and I'm an alcoholic. And my sobriety date is June 10th, 2011, and for that I'll be forever grateful. I'm a member of A Vision for You. We meet at Nashville United Methodist. I'm from Wilson, but my group's in Nashville. The church part, but about a block away in this little cabin. And we meet on Tuesday nights for a big book study group. The second to the last Tuesday is our tradition meeting, and then the very last Tuesday is our speaker meeting at 7 o'clock. So if you're in that area, come see us. So I am nervous, but I've heard at conventions before that the shaking is God trying to shake the truth out of me, so I'm going to go with it. And hopefully God will move in soon. 3 things that I hope to speak to y'all about tonight that are imperative to my sobriety are faith, gratitude, and service. Faith for me, and I'm paraphrasing from a quote I heard before, but that jumping off point when you get to the end of the road and there's darkness and you don't know what's ahead. Faith for me is believing that God is either going to teach me to fly or He's going to give me something firm to stand on. Gratitude for me is not just being grateful for the life that I have today, but every experience and everything I've ever been through in my whole life, which has gotten me to where I am and where I hope to be someday in the future, for anything that could happen, and remembering that the things that happen in my life are not God doing things to me, but God doing things for me. And from what I've learned in AA is gratitude is an action step. So showing God that I'm grateful for the life that I have leads right into service work. And also from the book and being taught from all of y'all that it is our primary purpose, the service work. And I'll touch on that a little bit more towards the end. So I'll start off when I was a little kid. I grew up in Kinston to a family that appeared to be the Beaver Cleaver family, but we were far from it. I know today now that I am a result of how I chose to react to what happened in my childhood, not for what actually happened in my childhood. But I held on to a lot of that, and I did grow up in a family that was religious. We went to church. I went to youth groups, I went to Bible camps, and I always thought I had a relationship with God until it was tested for the very first time. And that was when my grandpa died. My grandpa was the most precious person in the entire world to me. And when he died, I remember being very angry at God and resentful and thinking, if you would take him away from me, then you must not love me. Now, mind you, my grandpa was 80 years old when he died. He had cancer, so he didn't just die all of a sudden. I had many times to say goodbye to him, and a few days before he actually passed, I was able to travel to go see him and tell him I loved him and say goodbye. But instead, I chose to hang on to self-pity and resentments towards God. And looking back at my childhood, I can now trace it back to already having a lot of those character defects. Sense of entitlement, selfish, self-centeredness, self-pity. A few examples are most kids can tell you the 3 favorite things that they got for Christmas. I can tell you the 3 things that I didn't get for Christmas. I did not get a drum set. I did not get a pony. And I did not get this sweater that had to be hand washed. And I held on to that sweater resentment for a long time. Selfishness, and I remember going to my grandpa's house and he had this big bowl of oranges, and I had eaten one while I was there, and they were so good. And so when it was time to go, I put on my winter coat and I took all those oranges and I shoved them in my coat and I zipped them up, and I went to go tell him goodbye, and he wanted me to give him a hug, and I just kept shaking my head. And he's like, "What's wrong with you, girl? Come give me a hug." And I was like, "Mm-mm." And he finally just grabbed my arms up and all the oranges fell out. And he just started laughing, and he's like, "What in the world? Do you know anything I have is yours? All you had to do was ask." And he went and got a brown paper bag, and he picked up all the oranges and put them in the bag. And I remember thinking, I wonder why I didn't ask. But, I mean, that stems right back to that entitlement. They were mine, I wanted them, and I was going to take them. And so I did. Selfishness, I remember my dad's birthday. He took all of us up to Washington, D.C., and we had adjoining rooms. And my sister and I was in one room, and my parents were in the other. And my grandma, his mother, called to wish him a happy birthday. Well, she called our phone in our room instead of his phone. Well, I didn't want to get up and have to walk across the room to tell him that his mom wanted to wish him a happy birthday, so I told her she needed to call him later, and I hung up. And these are just some examples. I mean, there's way too many. But at an early age, already having those character defects, that big void, that big hole that I now am grateful to have filled with God. Before alcohol even started, I was filling it with men. That was the hole that I filled. I had no identity. I had to be with somebody. I think there was like 2 weeks that I wasn't dating somebody my whole life. I was the runaway bride. Whatever eggs he liked, I liked. Whatever sports he was into, I was, even though I didn't really care about sports. If I wasn't with a guy, I felt like I had no identity. I felt lost. And so from that, and I know now too, looking back, even though my parents had tried to raise me in a way where we went to church and instill those values and morals in me, those character defects that have been taught to me in the book that crop up shut me off from the sunlight of the Spirit and from ever accepting God into my life. The fear and not knowing who I was and being scared and always relying on somebody else. So from there, I was a pretty good high school student. I didn't get in a lot of trouble. I drank my junior, senior. One of my friends fell off a balcony and ruptured his spleen. And I remember being the DD the rest of the weekend, and I remember shaking my head and looking at people thinking, how could y'all drink after, like, we just had a friend that was literally airlifted to the hospital? And so I was the DD the rest of the time. I didn't drink really again until I got to college, which there it felt normal. And I did have a lot of drinking stories, but they weren't really that abnormal from other people's drinking stories, and I don't believe I ever really crossed the line. In college, I can think of 2 times I ever blacked out. We kept alcohol in the house all the time, and it wasn't something that I couldn't stay away from at the time. So fast forwarding back to where my grandpa died, from there, my drinking changed a little bit, and I ended up with a guy after that was my most physically, verbally, and emotionally abusive relationship I've ever been in, and that took me to Wilson. And I know now, looking back, that was already God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself when that relationship ended. Because I was so scared to leave him because I didn't know who I was. But as soon as that relationship ended, I remember thinking, like, what do you do when a big relationship ends? Well, you drink. That's what people do, right? So I then started using entitlement. Like, I was entitled to drink. I had just gotten out of this relationship, although I'd never cried about it. But I started using alcohol to numb myself from ever really feeling anything from the very beginning. I was working in a jewelry store at the time, and 2 weeks later met another guy who I'm now married to. But he had his life together, and he had not drank until he was 21, and he was a deacon at the church, and like had a good job. And I was like, maybe that's what's wrong with me. I've been with the wrong kind of guy, and so of course I'm going to be like him now. So I decided to go back to school, and I quit my job, and I moved to Raleigh. And I studied really hard. I decided I wanted to become a nurse, and went to school, but I would drink that at night. Like, I would start off with like a bottle that I would drink, and I lived with 2 of my guy friends. And I would go to school, and then I would drink at night, and then I'd get up, and I'd exercise hard, and everything was an extreme. Everything I did was like to the fullest. So I did well in school, but I was like drinking hard and exercising hard, and there was no like middle ground for me. There was no gray area. And it was the first time that I started hearing stories about myself that were really off. Like, well, we left the bar, and we got to the stoplight, and you jumped out, and you ran back to the bar because you weren't ready to leave yet. I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And then we had all gone out, and the next day, like, I woke up, and I was like, who threw up in my bed? And realizing it was me. And I was like, that's so weird. Like, I've never been a throw-up person. And then having a picture shown to me, because I guess this is around when we started having, like, the phones that took pictures of me with CO on my hand while I got my arms around 2 of my friends. And I was like, what in the world? And they were like, oh, that's for CO. You were cut off. They were serving you water when you were ordering vodka at the bar. And I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty bad to get cut off in Raleigh. And so I was starting to think, like, maybe my drinking's gotten a little crazy, but I'm in college, and, like, I'm doing well in school, and I'm entitled. So that guy ended up proposing to me, and I moved down to the beach, and not a whole lot changed. We got married, and the honeymoon is basically a blur to me. We had alcohol that stayed 24/7 refilled every day, and so I could come up with a million reasons. I have to go to the bathroom, I forgot like my hat, like I kept going back to the room and drinking, and that's basically a blur to me. And when we came home that day, I remember crying and being so upset, and he was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I have to live in Wilson now. Like, I've gone out of my way to never live in Wilson, and now I'm back in Wilson because I thought it was Wilson was my problem. Everything bad to me had happened in Wilson. The guy who cheated on me, and I had this terrible job, like, but the boss was so mean to me, like, and I never wanted to live in Wilson, and it was never me. I was always pointing out to everybody else." So there was about 3 months before nursing school started, and my drinking just hit a whole nother level. My mother-in-law had graciously given us a bar as our wedding gift. And it was the first time that I started hiding my drinking, where I was filling vodka bottles with water and adding like some Coke to like the bourbon and the whiskey in different bottles, and trying to fill it back up and trying to hide my drinking. I remember I had like a wine bottle that somebody had given us, and I kept replacing it as if my husband didn't realize that the labels were changing each time. And for a while, like, I would go out of my way to replace the bottle, so the label was the same, but I finally got to the point where I didn't care anymore. So I decided that I needed to get busier, and so I took up tennis, and I started volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club, but I couldn't ever make it there without being drunk, so eventually I decided I didn't need to show up anymore. I started nursing school. Somehow, by the grace of God, I got through nursing school and graduated and passed the boards, and started working in Rocky Mount, where I worked on a floor where I ran into a lot of alcoholics. And you would think that there would be some similarity there for me, but I remember feeling so sorry for them and hearing their stories and hearing the wives and the family members that were in there with them, and thinking, how can they live with themselves? How can they keep doing this to their family members? And like, why don't they get help? Mind you, I was leaving the hospital and driving straight to the Harris Teeter and drinking the whole way home. And I only worked 3 12-hour shifts, so I had 4 other days to drink. And most of the time, I didn't drink on the weekend. I was able to make it through the weekend. And I think it's why my husband was able to put up with me for so long, was he kept thinking after the weekend he'd get that glimmer of hope that maybe that Monday, like, I'd be sober, and I never was. So he decided that, something needed to change. He was coming home a lot, and I would be passed out. So we decided that I needed a baby because I needed something to do. I was just bored. And so it took a while to get pregnant, and I did, and I would love to tell y'all that I stopped drinking when I got pregnant, but that would be a lie. I remember going to buy my pregnancy test and buying a 4-pack of wine, at the same time telling myself that if I was pregnant, that would be the last time I was ever going to drink. And so a new emotion cropped up for me that I hadn't dealt with before, because I never thought I'd hurt anybody with my drinking but myself. I started hating myself, which was a new emotion that was terrible to have to deal with. And so I drank and to try to make it go away. And I remember for the first time thinking, like, what's wrong with me? Like, what mother would drink knowing they're pregnant? Like, and I would get online and I would look up these doctors and I would pay them money online to tell me that my baby was okay. Like, this is how much I had to drink today. This is how far along I am. Tell me my baby's still okay. Like, when do I need to stop drinking? And just crying and thinking, like, what's happened to me? And so it got finally to the point where I started asking my husband to, like, just be near the phone, and as soon as I left the hospital, I would call him and I would talk to him the whole way home. It was the only way I could drive from the hospital to the house without stopping to buy something in between. I started hiding him, but there were plenty of other days that he wasn't available, and I started hiding alcohol in the bushes, in my car, all kinds of places. And so it kept getting worse, and then it started to get better after I was calling him. So my drinking was somewhat better, but it never ended. I was, by the grace of God, given a very healthy baby boy. And 3 weeks later, I started drinking again. And I literally remember sitting in that Target, and before I went in, I just started crying because I knew it had started all over again. But I had now developed a new rationalization. You know, well, if you were at home all day and your baby screamed and was unhappy, you would drink too. And I moved out of my husband's room, and I moved into the nursery, and I slept with my son, and I kept my alcohol in the crib. And that way I could drink how I wanted to, and I could rationalize that by thinking that I was being a good wife and making sure my husband wasn't having to get up with the baby at night. And I'm not proud of any of these things. These are very hard for me to talk about, but this is where my drinking took me. So it started getting worse where my husband would come home and I would be half cooked, and be passed out on the floor, and the baby would be screaming in the crib. And one day he came home to check on me before he left to go get a haircut. And he told me that he was taking Bo, my son, with him to go get his haircut, and I was too drunk to hear him. And so when I woke up, I panicked and I called the police. And I had my neighbors and I had dear friends and I had the police scouring our house looking for my son, who was safely with my husband but could not answer the phone because he couldn't reach his phone while he was getting his haircut. Another time I had stopped by the ABC store on the way to Smithfield to go get baby clothes, and was so drunk when I got there, the lady thought that I had low blood sugar and called the ambulance, and I was taken to the hospital in Smithfield. And my son, my 6-month-old son, who was still in a car seat, was taken also. And my husband was at a continuing education course in Chapel Hill and had to get out and leave and come pick us up. I had also hit a car that day and had put the wrong number on the car. And since the ambulance had taken me away, my car was still in the parking lot, so the police showed up at my house the next day. And but again, I got out of it. I kept getting out of stuff. Like I had to pay for the car to be fixed, but nobody could prove that I was drunk when I was driving that car. So again, no consequences for me. So my husband's like, so after that incident, he's like, something has to change. And so I had also developed another characteristic of manipulation. I was like, well, what kind of mother? He was threatening to put me in rehab, and I said, well, what kind of husband would take a mother away from their kid? Like, you know, he needs me. And so we decided, or he decided, because he could not go to work and work from 8 to 5 without worrying what was happening while he was gone, that we would get a babysitter. And I say this because I need to hear this as well. This babysitter was for me. It was not for my son. It was so that he could go to work and without worrying. So now I no longer had to feel guilty because my son was going to get clean and fed and bathed, and my drinking just took a whole new level. So he started taking my driver's license away from me and my keys, but I had duplicates all over the house. Or I would stroll the baby down to the gas station, or I would call the taxi cab and drive around that way. So that wasn't helping either. So he finally said, that's it, I'm done, you're going to rehab. And I said, just get me through the weekend, because in my mind I had never tried to stop drinking. I could not make it through the rest of the day. And so December 2nd, 2010, I was put in rehab. I put myself in rehab. He drove me there. I put myself there. In rehab, 2 really good things happened to me. I was introduced to AA for the first time. And I guess I need to back up and say, before I went to rehab, I had tried a therapist who I just told lies to, but who I was actually taken in to see her one time completely drunk and was put in a dry out place at the hospital for a weekend. I had tried a shot that they give you that was supposed to take away the desire to drink, but I realized it just made me not taste the alcohol, which who cares what it tastes like anyway, the way I was drinking it. I tried antabuse. I tried everything. Nothing worked for me. So I was introduced to AA in rehab. And the second really good thing that happened to me was I realized that I loved my son. That drinking not only had numbed me for how much I hated myself and the guilt I felt, and the self-pity I felt and the resentments and anger, but it had also numbed me to ever loving my son. I had never given myself a chance to love my son or have any bond with him. And I was only allowed to see him for 4 hours on Sunday. And so I missed his first birthday. I was in rehab then. I missed his first Christmas. And I remember I would put him in the car on Sunday after those 4 hours, and that child still loved me unconditionally, and he would scream because he didn't want to be put back in the car. And I remember shutting the door and hearing that sound, and it just haunted me. And so those were the two amazing things that happened to me in rehab. Mind you, even after all that, I relapsed twice in rehab. The second time, I actually left rehab and went and spent the night in a hotel and drank all night, and then came back the next day and turned myself in. And so they decided that they were going to kick me out of rehab. And I was not going to be kicked out of rehab. I mean, you can't get kicked out of rehab. They're supposed to be the one place that has to take you. So I decided that I was going to leave. And before I left, they told me that I was a hopeless case, that they had never seen anyone's disease progress to the point that it had at someone at the age that I was. And that the only possible hope, chance that I had of ever getting sober was AA. And that really resonated with me. But I left that night and I drove back to Wilson. And I did what any good mother does. I picked my son up out of his crib at 11 o'clock at night because I wanted to see him. And I made yet another promise that I wasn't going to keep. Mommy's back, and I'm here now. And I made it through the weekend before I started drinking again. I did try to get to a meeting, and the meeting schedule happened to be wrong. And so I decided I would drink instead. And then I went. It took me several months of going into AA, and AA became an excuse for me to get out of the house. And I had learned just enough to be dangerous. 2 people make a meeting. So I would sit my husband down on the sofa if it was raining or if I didn't feel like going to a meeting, and I would tell him that 2 people made a meeting, and I would read to him the chapter to the wives so he would know what he had done wrong. And I would leave the part out that says, do not let the visas as a club over your head, because he didn't need to know that part. And I would say I was going to an AA meeting, and really I would have the taxi cab driver, I would get him to drop me off, and I would call a taxi, and they would drive me to the ABC store, and I would sit outside, because one of the meetings I went to was at the hospital, and I would sit out there and drink, and I would tell people I had dying family inside. And so, or I would go in the bathroom and drink, and then I would be there when he came to pick me up. And, you know, it's like, how did you get drunk at an AA meeting? Like, how does that happen? So I then celebrated my son walking for the first time by getting my first DUI. I was going down a one-way street the wrong way, trying to get to an AA meeting, and it hit a family, and thank God I had just started going, and it was 35, and I barely swiped them, and nobody was hurt. But of course, I am angry because I have been caught now. And I elected to have a breathalyzer put in my car because previously I had wrecked my car a few years before that, and it had toothpaste in the car, and had eaten some toothpaste and had managed to blow a 0. So I was like, I can fool this thing, and this will get everybody off my back. They are updated. That does not work, just so you know. But so I had that put in my car, and I was still going to meetings drunk. And then I finally went to one where I was sober, and ended up meeting Dwight, who was my sponsor's husband, and he gave me the number to my sponsor today, and he told me to call her because there were not any women at that meeting at the time. And so I went to that meeting, and I remember seeing her, and I started working with her, but I wasn't as bad as the rest of y'all. Like, I still had a house, I had quit my job, I still had my son, and I had 1 DUI. Y'all had like 10. And so I wasn't going to have to do everything. I was going to just do some of it, and that would be enough to get everybody off my back, and I was going to learn the trick that's somewhere in the book about how to drink responsibly. And so I just kept waiting for, like, I'm going to find the mystery out, and then I'm just going to be done here. But my drinking continued to get worse, and where I had not become an everyday drinker, I became an everyday drinker and a weekend drinker. And when my sponsor told me to call her at 9 o'clock, I called her at 9:30, and I didn't do anything she told me to do. And then finally we went away, and when I came back, there were 4 days in a row that I don't remember at all. And I woke up, and I found bottles that I didn't remember buying. And I woke up that morning, and I dragged myself into the den where my babysitter was and my son, because she was still there. And I remember him vacuuming. He was just kind of vacuuming around in the carpet with his little toy vacuum cleaner. And when I walked in there, he didn't even notice I'd walked in. And this is where I was. I looked at him and I thought, you ungrateful child, do you have any idea how terrible I feel? And I've dragged myself out here to spend time with you. You don't even care I'm in here. It's fine, I'm going back to bed. So I went back there, and I thought I had seen one bottle left. I was like, if I can just get this one little bottle down, I'll feel better. And so I went to the sink because I thought I might get sick, and I threw it back, and I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror for the first time. And I smelled terrible. I couldn't remember the last time I'd showered. My skin was gray. My clothes were inside out. And I was just, for the first time, I noticed myself. And I was like, wow. So I called, I did not call my sponsor that night because I knew she was speaking in Greenville, and I thought she'd make me go with her, and I didn't think that I could ride in the car for that long. And I called her the next morning, and I said, I'm ready. And she said, are you really? And I said, I'm 90%, like in my head, I'm thinking like, yeah, I'm like 60, 90% ready. And she was like, well, you're going to have to do everything I suggest you do, and I was like, okay. And she said, well, there's home group tonight. I said, well, about that, I was like, I've got to go to the beach because my sister-in-law is having a really hard time right now, and she really needs me. And she just started laughing, and she was like, honey, she was like, how are you going to go help her? You can't even help yourself. And I was like, huh. And so I packed up my husband and my son in the car to go to the beach, and we drove to Rocky Mount, and I went to my meeting. And for some reason that night, and usually I half listened to what everybody said, for some reason that night I was willing to be open and to listen for the first time. Instead of trying to compare with everybody's story, I tried to identify for the first time. And I remember that, it didn't make sense to me until later that, no one in this room can help you if you're just going to sit there and say, that didn't happen to me, like I was doing. This didn't happen and that didn't happen. But until I started listening to, the feelings and saying, well, no, I felt like that. She said, I think what took me so long to get sober was I was always standing on somebody else's shoulders. And for some reason, it hit me that night. I was like, oh, my God, what if this isn't as bad as it's going to get? What if I really do lose my son? My husband was threatening to send me back to rehab. And so I got in the car that night, and I prayed my first honest prayer. And I prayed, dear God, please don't make me have to lose everything to get this. I'm ready. And we went to the beach, and we stayed in my mother-in-law's house with her, who always had a ton of alcohol. And I usually had to be extremely drunk to be around her, and I didn't even think about drinking. I called my sponsor when she told me to. I went to every meeting she told me to go to while I was there. And I came back, and I started doing what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to do my DUI cleanup by going to the Y and working, and I was going to wipe up equipment. And I said, I'm not going to do that. Olivia doesn't wipe sweaty equipment. And Meredith said, that's exactly what you're going to do. And she said, maybe this is what's been your problem all along, is you haven't been humble. You haven't been willing to be humble to clean up your side. And said, okay. So I went, and I showed up when I was supposed to. And instead of wiping sweaty equipment, it's not because I asked them to change it. They put me in the nursery. And I got to be around kids that were the same age as my son, which was really neat. And I started doing what she said to do. And I realized that for a long time what had happened was I could put 11 days together, but that was it. I was a chronic relapser. And what was happening was I kept hearing people say, just don't drink, just don't drink. And I was like, okay, so I put the drink down, and then I don't feel better. What's going on? I don't feel any better. Why am I not going to drink? If I drink, I at least don't feel anything. But what was happening was I wasn't changing any of my actions. I was hoping to put down the drink, but then all my character defects and all the emotions of everything that I was doing wrong and everyone I had hurt came flooding back in. And so until I started taking the next right action, regardless of how I felt, did I actually start feeling better. And once I actually started taking those little actions of calling her at 9 o'clock when she said to call her, and I'll get to my next story, but doing these little actions, did things start to change. So my husband's birthday is June 15th, 5 days after I got sober. And this was the first year nobody was going to mess up his birthday because I was sober this year. And so I called him for work to see how his birthday was going, and nobody had made my husband a cake. And everybody makes a cake at this office for whoever's birthday it is. So I proceeded to call the lady up and let her know what I thought about her not making my husband a cake. And then I called my sponsor. See, I was still learning. And I was like, can you believe this? And Meredith just laughed at me, and she was like, do you know what you're going to do now? And I was like, no. She said, you're going to call her back and apologize. I was like, I am not. She was so mean. She said, yes, you are. And so I was like, why? And she said, honey, if you want your husband to have a cake, you make him a cake. She was like, you had no right to do that. You need to call her back and apologize. So I had never said I was sorry for anything I'd ever done, and actually meant it. And so I called her back, and to this day, she wasn't very nice to me when I called her back, but I can look her in the face, and I can look her in the eye, and I can be proud of, I don't have anything on my side of the street to be sorry for, and she and I get along fine now. And from that, I started seeing slowly how things would be different. From there, my life has just been a complete turnaround, and it's been one blessing after another. Going through this steps changed my life. Being able to say that my life was unmanageable was obvious. And I had already believed in God, I just had kind of lost how to have a relationship with Him. And so through watching my sponsor, and I believed that she believed there was a God and that He could change her life. And I saw that her life had changed. Was I able to start kind of working on step 2 and kind of believing that there was a power, something greater than me that could actually help me. Turning my will and life over to God is something I still do daily. It's very important to me. My step 4 I put off for about a month, and then I finally sat down and did it, and I was so angry. And so I thought, just wait till my sponsor hears what these people have done to me. And so, I got there, and I, had luckily already told her the worst thing that I'd ever done when I was drunk already. So, I know a lot of people were nervous about that, but, that one was already off my chest. So I was like, just wait till you hear. I had my dog on the list. I had crazy stuff on my list, and I was reading it out to her, and then to have her flip it and be like, where were you in this? And look at my side of it. Was the most freeing thing for me was I let go of so much anger that I had and resentments towards family members, and being able to see that a lot of their response was based on my actions, and they were reacting to the way I had treated them. And so step 4 and 5, and then going back and praying. And I know a lot of people talk about, I saw the birds for the first time, but that's true. That's how I felt. I remember that drive home, how peaceful it was. Making my amends was a little bit trickier for me. There was only one, specific one where I actually had to pay money back, and it was from rehab where I had stolen alcohol from the Walmart. And so I had to, I was like, I don't understand. It's $10. It's never going to get to where it needs to get to. That person will probably just put it in their pocket, whoever gets the letter, and she's like, just do it. And I did it, and I felt so much better afterwards. And the rest of my amends have been living amends. And the most amazing one happened was my grandmother. So she was my dad's mom, and she had congestive heart failure, and my dad is a doctor, and he would go see her every single day. Well, it just happened to be, and my parents don't travel a lot, that they had decided to go on a cruise for their anniversary, and they were celebrating it late, and he asked me to go check on her. And I was on my way to the beach with friends, and I said that I would stop by and check on her, because a lot of my living amends now is if you ask me to do something, I'm going to show up and I'm going to do it. And he knew I was going to do it. And so I stopped through, and she was had been having some trouble, but had gotten a little bit better, so he thought she was going to be okay. And when I stopped through, she was dying, and congestive heart failure was one of the specialties on my floor. And so she was in a house where there weren't nurses, and there were only nursing aides. And as soon as I walked in, I knew she had a day, if even. And so old Olivia would have run, because I don't deal with situations like that. And I didn't. I called my sponsor, and I sent my husband on with my children, and I stayed. And I stayed at my parents' house, and I had no way of getting in touch with them except through email. And I stayed with her, and I was with her that night, and I slept, and I got up the next morning, and I felt emotionally exhausted, and I got on my knees, and I prayed and asked for God's strength to be with me in His presence and love. And I went back, and I had my 12 and 12 that I always keep in my purse, and I read my 12 and 12, and my big book, and I just sat there and prayed for a long time and just held her hand because she didn't even know I was there, I didn't think. And then she changed and started getting worse. And so I laid in the bed and I started crying beside her. And then all of a sudden I heard all of your voices. Stop thinking about yourself. What are you doing to help her right now? And so I called a minister and asked him to come do her last rites. I rubbed her back. I told her I loved her. I called my aunt and I held the phone up to her ear so that she could talk to her and tell her what she needed to say. And I prayed with her and I held her hand, and while the minister was there, my phone has a train sound when you get a text because of my son loves trains. And that noise went off and she squeezed my hand, and so I was able to tell my aunt that she had heard everything that she had told her. And I held her hand and I told her I loved her, and I was there with her when she took her last breath. And that is an example of the love and grace that God gives you when you do His will and when you ask for Him to come into your life, when you're open and honest and willing to receive Him. And those are the things that He has given me through my life. Besides being able to make that amends not only to my grandmother, but to my dad, who was extremely grateful that she was not there by herself, was the peace that I had when she was buried. It was so different than when my grandpa died. I was so angry and felt so sorry for myself, and I could imagine my grandmother in that coffin, and I knew she was at peace, and I saw that she had gone peacefully and was not alone. I've also since then had a second son soberly, which is a miracle in itself. I was 7 months sober when I got pregnant, which is not what I would advise anyone to do. But I believe that God puts things in your life for a reason when He does. And it made me throw myself into AA. I'm also, I was told to always have a service position. I come from a strong sponsorship line that believes in service, and I told you I would touch on that again. And I was secretary first, and then I went to the CFC for the first time 3 years ago. And I fell in love with prison work. And I started going when I got back at Fountain, which is nearby, and I was going a little bit, but I just had my son, and so I was going like once a month. And I was sober. My emotional sobriety was not where it needed to be. And my sponsor was like, you need to start going more. And I hadn't had a chance to connect with those women. So the next year I became head of corrections at my home group, which is what I still am now. And the women, the Fountain prison shut down, and the women were moved to Snow Hill at Eastern. And we were getting letters asking for meetings to be taken in there. There was already apparently a meeting there, but they were asking for a more structured meeting. And so I started trying to get in there, and it took me till March to get a meeting, and then it took me till June to get cleared to go in. And I've been going to the prison now in Snow Hill, which is about a 40-minute drive from where I live now every Thursday. It's normally where I am on Thursday nights. It has been the most amazing experience for me. If you're not involved in prison work, I encourage you. And if you've never been to the CFC, go, because you will be on fire by the time you leave to go get into the prison and help somebody. That the prison work helps me so much more than it even helps them. And to think that 40 women don't get a meeting if I'm not there, it's not that I'm so important or so special, and it's not that I necessarily am going to say something that's just amazing or astounding or change somebody's life, but I have to be present for somebody else at that meeting to say something amazing. And it's so humbling, and to hear some of those women who've got 10 years who've been in there, and some that are so desperately looking for the tools. I've been working now with a guy, Joe, that lives in Kinston, to get some more women in there for help, because I know they get tired of seeing my face. And there's so many of them that I'd love to get some more people in, because it needs to be broken up too. They've started not letting the CRVs come in with the rest of the ladies, so we really need 2 people in there. I've gotten a chance to sponsor a lady before who's not stayed sober. And she decided she was going to try it on her own, and she was at Fountain and had come to Eastern. And so I know now that she was put in my life for a reason too, because it put a new fire under me after that. And I'm sponsoring a lady now who is at at Eastern. And I only get to see her beforehand, and I've finally gotten to let me see her for an hour before the meeting every other week so that I have that time with her. But it's making me dig through the book again because we're writing letters in between time. So that's just been an amazing gift. I believe in sponsorship. I can't say that enough. I'm so grateful that I had a sponsor who was willing to deal with me. I was her first one, and thank God, because she was more patient with me than any person should be with another. I believe in having a home group. A home group's so important. There's the family that you're born into, and then the family you get to choose, and that is my home group for me. That's my family. Let's see what else. I've since been, I'm a deacon now at my church, which is crazy. Like, surely there's somebody more qualified than me to be a deacon, but no, there I am. Which I have been taught that the more you learn in here, you should spread it elsewhere. And so when Christmas time came, they wanted to do a meeting at the church for keeping Christ in Christmas, and they were talking about like making ornaments for the kids, and I was like, why don't we do some service work? Why don't we teach the kids what Christ really is about? And that's about Christmas time, about giving back to other people. And so I was able, from what y'all taught me, to shift that whole meeting and change it into the kids actually making ornaments and putting together soup boxes and stuff to give to somebody else, and letting them know it's okay for you not to take something home and to just give it away to everybody else. And so that's been really neat. I'm also involved in like 6 or 7 other committees at church, which I've learned now I really need to scale back on so that I can focus more here in AA. I help at my son's school. The most amazing thing happened with my son. So this was my son that I drank with. And so I went to his kindergarten assessment a few months ago. And not only is my son smart and doing well in school, but he's thriving socially. He's a good kid. He shares. He's nice to the other kids. And I got in the car and I just started bawling. And my husband's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "These are the gifts that God gives you. That child has no reason to be thriving or doing well in any part of his life. And that is not me. That is God working through me and through him, and the gifts that I get for doing his work in his will. And yes, God, anything you need me to do." I'm trying to think of what else to tell y'all. My children actually miss me when I'm not around. He notices when I'm not there. He wants me at all of his school events, and I help out at the school too, and I try to be a part of that as much as I can. I think what I struggle with most now is a balance, trying to figure out how to be in all those places. I also am constantly reminded, and I need to be, that if I don't put AA first, all those things can fall off that I treasure as well. And to be able to get up here and speak to y'all tonight is so important to me, because I don't have that long, but it still gets harder and harder every time to remember what my life used to be like. And I need to get up here and I need to go back and remember that every day that I have a choice to be more like y'all, or I can be more like who I used to be. And it's all based on the actions that I take and that I choose to take each day. So thank y'all for letting me share. And I just wanted to finish up with, and I know there's Dave that always shares this, and I remember every time I've heard him speak, I'm flipping through my book trying to find it. I'm like, where is it? And I finally had found it, so I try to share it now at the end on 552. I get everything I need in Alcoholics Anonymous, and everything I need I get. And when I get what I need, I invariably find that it was just what I wanted all the time. And I have found that to be true in my life, and I hope that y'all do too. And keep coming back. Don't leave before the miracle happens for you. Thanks.